very much for...
This is how we're starting the panel.
Thank you so much for coming to the C2E2 Doctor Who panel. Two of our panelists are in transit due to lines, so we will, now we're having flashbacks to the Zone 4 podcast for those of you who, but anyway, I want to thank everyone for coming. Just a few things that we want to do. We're going to be talking about Doctor Who inclusion. The first thing I want to do is I want to dedicate this panel to Jennifer Kelly. I worked with Jennifer on, she was programming for Chicago's artists, and I was fortunate to work with her as auction director. She ran the Alfred Gallifrey post online. She co-wrote a book on Who fandom, and she passed away a few weeks ago. And she was also on my short list when I was thinking about doing these panels at C2E2. So I wanted to dedicate this to her, because I think if she were, I'd like to think she casts a large shadow on Who fandom. And I believe every Who fan owes her a debt. And I wanted to honor her memory and dedicate this to her. And so just a few operating things as we proceed. We're going to be talking about some potentially tricky issues and some things that we also understand you may need to use the bathroom, you may need to take a call. Please feel free to take care of yourself and head outside. When we open up for questions from the audience, just one thing to remember is your first sentence should be a question, and you shouldn't have a second sentence. This is a conversation. This is a conversation. It's not a town hall. And we're not talking about production rumors, missing episode news, spoilers for production. We're going to be focused very specifically on Doctor Who with a highlight on Series 11. And we will be spoiling Series 11, so if you haven't watched it, okay, please do. Please feel free to tweet out. You can take video. We've got the hashtag WhoMeetup and various. Two of our panelists are on their way in, so we'll try to accommodate as possible. We're also on Facebook and Patreon. So thank you very much. And what I'd like to do is, normally what I'd like to start is what we do, who we are, what we do, and I see a panelist coming in, so yeah. Let me guess, you're not a number, you're a free person.
That's right. Woo-hoo. I am prisoner locked today.
Oh, nice.
Oh, and our other panelist is here. Okay, so. Okay, everyone, if you could, we will try to speak into the mic so that you all can hear us. So again, let's go through with introductions. Who we are, what we do, and who our first doctor was. So my name is Dymowski. I am a writer and organizer for the Chicago Doctor Who meetup, and my first doctor was Tom Baker.
I'm Xiana Moon, and I'm the founder and director of Rocks Geek, which is a nerd-themed belly dance and fire performance company that most of you probably got flyers for. If I did my job right. My first doctor was Christopher Eccleston.
Hi, I'm Michi Trota. I'm a writer, essayist, and some people may know me from Uncanny Magazine, where I am the managing editor and nonfiction editor. My first doctor was actually John Pertwee.
Hello, my name is Daina Almario-Kopp. I'm a sex researcher, so don't find those too often. I specialize in naked morids and human sexuality, writing a book on natural male birth control. So just shameless promotion, find that on GoFundMe. And my first doctor was Tom Baker, and I am now knitting myself my second Doctor Who scarf.
Hi, my name is Cristal Martinez. I was formerly the hostess of Chicago TARDIS's Green Room and Staff Lounge. And I'm an all-around Doctor Who fan. My first Doctor was Paul McGann. And I think after that, I guess second Doctor would be David Tennant. So.
One thing I forgot to mention, I also belly dance as a TARDIS, which is relevant to this room.
Okay, so why don't we just start, let's start the panel with just a very simple question. What did we all think of Series 11?
Good times.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It was. I liked how it was kind of a refresher, and for people who had never really watched Doctor Who, this was a really good season to start fresh. And I love it particularly when Doctor Who's been going on for so long, there are access points that you can point people toward where they're like, hey, I've heard of this thing, I want to watch it, but it's so old, there's so much, where is a good place to start? I think this most recent season would be a really good place for someone to start if they had never gotten into it, they want to see what it's doing now, as opposed to like, well, you want to go back. And I love classic Doctor Who, but some of it's a little hard to watch, and our tastes as a modern audience are different than they were when we started watching. So I love the fact that there is something new that we can tell new people to check out.
I really, really appreciate the focus on stories with people of color, and that you can tell that both in front of the camera and behind the camera, there's been a change in the staff, right? Doctor Who is no longer completely dominated by white men, and nothing against white men, but you dominate everything else. So let us have.
I was also really fond of this season's, I guess, it seemed to be very thematically much more open to other types of media, and the things that made this season much more accessible to non-legacy Doctor Who fans. It's very refreshing to see other types of storytelling presented in the Doctor Who format. So.
Yeah, it was. I'm a fan of long fiction. Like I've read books that take series that take forever. We're all sitting here waiting for for George R. R. Martin's last book. But I really, really was getting tired after the last several seasons of it's the season-long arc.
Right.
And I was really, really tired of let's treat the female companion like she's a puzzle box to be solved. I liked that these episodes were they were literally more episodic.
Yes.
It wasn't, there was a larger theme, but it wasn't like, oh, there's Bad Wolf the whole time.
It was much easier to, I guess, consume it in a very palatable way instead of having to absorb the entire season. You can just take one episode and really enjoy that one episode for itself.
I also appreciate that the tone has shifted a little bit. There are a lot more serious episodes in this season, and the show takes itself far more seriously in general, and in a good way. Like, we're telling stories that need to be told seriously as opposed to stories that can be just really, really flippant. For example, the Rosa Parks episode, you have Doctor Who for the first time ever really grappling with racism and what that means and what it looks like. Not just we're going to airdrop a companion who is black into the middle of some other century and pretend that everything's going to be fine.
Sorry. So my second degree is in theater costuming, so I of course love the costumes and the period stuff and all that. And although Doctor Who's been doing this all this time, I'm happy to see a refresher now as far as like looking at history in a different light and a more critical light. So like the one about India, the one about Rosa Parks, for example, instead of just like, let's go hang out with the Elizabethans and run away from them.
I mean, we did kind of have that sort of episode, right? There was, it wasn't with the Elizabethans. Yeah, Witchfire. So we still got a little bit of that, but I love that you're right, the aesthetic was a little more like, let's actually interrogate. And even that episode had, I think, more self-awareness about that sort of topic than I have come to expect from Doctor Who, and that was really nice.
It's interesting because The Witchfinders was written by Joy Wilkinson, who's a female playwright. I think it was like her first screenwriting gig, but she's written plays about, one was about called The Sweet Science of Bruising, which is about Victorian women's boxing. which is actually a thing.
Did not know that was a thing. That's awesome.
A friend of mine wrote a series of Sherlock Holmes stories involving Victorian women's boxing. Name's Andrew Salmon, is in the fish. I'll pre-plug. And she also wrote about, I forget the person's name, but it was a naval impersonator in World War I. And that episode was the first episode to be written by a woman and directed by a woman since the 80s. But I think it touches on...
By the way, that's really pathetic also.
But one of the things that I really liked about this season was, a couple of things. One is, as someone who grew up with the classic series, it was so nice to have a series of Doctor Who that didn't pander to me with the oddball reference. You know, like with the new Xiana from Pertwee, it wasn't, Jodie wasn't getting all like martial artsy. It was like, she takes her pinky, puts it against a person's neck, and they're paralyzed. I loved having a non-angsty Doctor, where she's the, it's not gloomy and angsty, it was, yes, I'm gonna go, I'm gonna really go and have fun. And I also like that even in the writing, and kind of touching on what we're actually going to be talking about, is that there's a better match, not just in terms of talking about like non-UK history, but integrating matching writers to content. So the Rosa episode was written by Valerie Blackman, who is, I think she's like the young adult laureate in England. She's also a woman of color. I've got the name here. Let's see, but the writer of Gives a Good Job, Daina Patel, is an Indian playwright, and Joy Wilkinson wrote Witchfinders. And it's, I think one of the nice things is Doctor Who was actually starting to be a little bit more seriously minded about issues of representation and also kind of that social conscience, which I don't think the show has had in a while. And I also love the fact that everything, including the music and the even the script writing, it was toned down. Not everything was epic that led to the big finale. So I'm wondering, kind of, and I know this was a very conscious decision on Chibnall's part. How do we think that kind of made itself known through the companions?
I really loved a lot of the companions. I'm very disappointed that Yaz did not get nearly as much story as I think she deserved. And I appreciate that they were really trying to go, I think, for a little bit more of a found family vibe, which totally fits with Doctor Who. I really, really love, I'm totally blanking on the character's name, the younger...
Ryan?
Yeah, I loved Ryan. I liked that they gave him increasingly more to do. I was a little like, I was very excited when they introduced him and they actually introduced him as having a disability and they show that. Mm-hmm. But it felt like they sort of dropped it throughout the season, which was very disappointing because it was exciting to see a Black character who was actually living with a disability and showing how that doesn't stop you from being a companion. You can be a companion who's a person of color who has a disability. And I feel like as much as the relationship with Graham was interesting, I feel like they sacrificed a lot of Yaz's characterization to focus on Graham and Ryan. I really wish we'd see more of Ryan and Yaz, who are age contemporaries who went to school, actually spending more time with each other, and I'm still really bitter about Grace in the first episode. So bitter. I may have yelled at the television. And I was like, are you kidding? Why? She's so awesome. She would have made the perfect companion, but
One of my favorite scenes in the entire series was having Ryan and Yaz sitting behind a dumpster talking about being in the United States during the era of Rosa Parks and the Civil Rights Movement. You got a perspective that, not even just in Doctor Who, but in TV in general, you never get to see two people of color, especially two people of color who are not the same color, talking about racism and what it means and how you deal with it, and how it affects you. In the US, racism is often kind of visualized as a black-white issue, or now in the Trump era, a black-white-brown issue. So a lot of people get left out of conversations when you, like, Michi and I are both East Asian. Well, you're more brown than I am.
My people's view was slightly different issues.
Yeah. So it's like, but you don't get a lot of characters on TV who are able to kind of tease out the various nuances of what things look like for different groups of people of color, because we are not all the same. Even again within the Asian groups, we are not the same thing. It's not a monolith, and we're not homogenous.
Yeah, one of the things I really appreciated was Yaz actually saying how much she knows from history, that as a South Asian woman, she actually owes to the American Civil Rights Movement and all of the Black civil rights leaders like Rosa Parks and what they were doing in the US because of how that affected other civil rights movements throughout the world. And that was like, I appreciated that she called that out. While also talking about, she's, I think her family's Muslim.
Right, it was very much like a where do I fit in this whole hierarchy.
But they actually talk about what that's like in the UK and in Europe with Brexit, and you have Ryan talking about how even though he's in the UK, Grace made sure that he knew about Black civil rights history and Rosa Parks. I loved that they called that back.
And things are very different in Europe because I lived in Germany and I lived in England for like 3 months in London. And like racially, it's a very different culture there because people are much more integrated. And so I think they kind of portrayed in that episode how Brits coming to the US, and even now, like Africans I know who live in Europe, if they came to America, they'll get culture shock to see how Black people are treated. You know, and being a person of color myself, my mother's Lithuanian, my father's Colombian, you know, and like experiencing the kind of racism that exists here that I don't really see much of in Europe, like very little, you know, and I think it's interesting with that in mind that this is told from an English perspective.
Well, it's like we know that the racism that happens in the UK is going to be, very different. There's still a lot of anti-Black racism that happens there, and right now, particularly if you are a brown Muslim, it is not a good place to be politically because it's not a nice scene over there. I appreciate that they actually call that out because it feels like in a lot of Doctor Who, there's some I always go back to the episode with Ten and Martha. The Shakespeare episode, which I love, because Shakespeare and witches, and Martha's freaking awesome.
Martha's my favorite.
Yeah, but when she says like, hey, am I going to be okay? And he's like, just walk around like you own the place. I'm like, oh. There's that well-meaning white boy privilege right there.
Also, it does injustice to the story. You're not doing a good job of storytelling if you don't take your characters and their situations seriously.
It's like in The Witchfinders. The doctor at one point says, this never happened to me when I was a dude.
Like some people are like, oh, that's really heavy-handed. Like, no, it needs to be because otherwise it would just gloss right over a lot of the audience.
Okay, and speaking, I'm kind of shift gears a bit, go on that point, because I know with Chibnall has stated he wanted more of a social conscience in his writing. And we've talked about it from the with different people of color, but how do we feel that he's handled it overall throughout the season? Both in his scripts and those other scripts.
Sure, we haven't heard from you down there.
Well, I was going to say, it's nice to see more of it, and just in general. Being that the majority of the Doctor Who new episodes that I've seen, it's not really very much acknowledged, and I feel like one of the conceits in the show is to be able to mask these social issues with aliens and, have that issue of separation sort of not hit the ego so much of perhaps the main audience of white guys. But it's very nice just to see these issues openly spoken about, and I feel like having that explored is really the first step, and I think for the most part, I've been very happy with how it's turned out. I think Chibnall's done a good job.
I think it's a good first step. There were things, again, I have nothing against the actor who plays Graham. I actually think he's very good. But it felt like a lot of the times the stories, particularly the Rosa Parks episode, I feel like it was trying really hard to show you that Graham was one of the good guys. And it's like, why do you have to worry so much in a script where you are clearly going to a point in time where there is no question that racism, particularly against Black people in the US, was awful. And we know this, and we know the cultural zeitgeist now is pushing more and more toward the idea that we all admit that we have internalized racism, we have biases, that being the nice one doesn't mean that you're not incapable of racism. And it felt, I wish that the script had sort of pulled back from trying to sort of soft pedal other people's emotions about like, this is going to be this episode is going to show some very hard things. I know a couple of people of color and some Black friends who really had a hard time watching the episode because there's the issue where Ryan tries to pick up the woman's handkerchief and he gets yelled at because this is literally like, that is literally a start point to somebody losing their life if they are Black in this country, particularly back in that time. Still in this time it can happen. But I'm glad that they pushed that because it makes the audience that is not aware of how bad these sort of things are, not just then, but still now. But it makes me think about like who's still the primary audience for it. I like that because it's not perfect, it actually makes you think harder about who are they telling the story for? Where can they continue to push the narrative? And how can we tell these stories in a way that doesn't soft pedal the awfulness of our own history while also not capitalizing on trauma of other marginalized groups?
Yeah, and I thought that in some of the other efforts, it felt like Chibnall had a little bit too heavy of a hand. So like the episode of Arachnids in the UK, somebody should have. It's
Chris Knopf, she really clearly had fun in that episode.
Oh, it's funny because when I saw Chris Knopf was in it, I mean, I'm used to watching him as Mike Logan on Law and Order. So I'm used to doing things like being hard and punching aldermen and threatening people. Yeah, we are doing a Law and Order panel. Just want to let you know. And he gives, when I watched his performance, I was thinking to myself, and this is the sign of a true Doctor Who geek, Now Eric Roberts no longer has to worry about giving the campiest performance on TV.
Eric Roberts is in a corner crying somewhere, being like, but I love the
How dare you, Gordon? He is a treasure.
Yes.
I was watching TV and I saw Eric Roberts in a commercial for American Tubs, so I think he's okay. But the other, and it's I think it's one that I thought was a little. I think the worst example was the Brexit joke in Resolution, the Dalek episode.
Oh no.
Which, and what kind of my perspective, and I can see where Chibnall's coming from because back in the early 70s, Doctor Who actually did have a kind of social conscience about it. Star Trek was being shown in England from 69 to 71, so, and the production team was moving towards adult stories. So you had writers like Malcolm Hulke, who was a no-communist, no left-winger writing that kind of thing. You had more allegorical stories like The Curse of Peladon, which is all about England joining the European Union, whereas I think Chibnall kind of took the opposite effect. But what I'd like to kind of open up a conversation about is in terms of kind of the way the show has approached it. Do we feel that it's, we've talked about obviously thinking about who the audience is, who are they telling the story for. Do we think that it's always handled it well? And do we think there's room for growth in that area?
Yes, always room for growth. It's never perfect. I mean, this is something I think all of us know as storytellers and artists in one medium, is that there's always room for growth, and we try to approach it with as much consciousness and awareness as we can. I know that belly dance is something that Dawn approaches with a huge amount of respect and awareness, but we're always open to learning and hearing about how we can do better and things that we weren't aware of, because we don't want to harm our audience. We want our audience to enjoy what we're doing. And we always try to think about, so who is being left out of the conversation? who has not traditionally been included, and how can we expand that? I think that's what they are trying to do with this season. It's not perfect. There are some things like, I don't know if heavy-handed is the word that I would use, but it feels like they're clearly talking to an audience that is primarily, they want to appeal to an audience that's progressive, that is more white progressive than people of color, because some of the things that they are talking about and presenting is like, oh, this is a new thing. It's like, no, it's not.
In some ways, I don't think that that's a bad thing, though, because Doctor Who's audience has been so traditionally white. I mean, most media is made for white people, right? I have a slightly different opinion on Graham in the Rosa Parks episode because of that. I think Doctor Who's trying to do a lot to sort of bring that audience along that already exists, that does not necessarily have to think about any of these things, and is not necessarily exposed to any media that says, hey, you should think about these issues. And so one of the moments in that episode to me that was really interesting was when Graham at the very end is put into a position where he now becomes part of the story in a way he really does not want to be. He's no longer able to go away and say, oh, I'm just going to be the good guy. He's directly participating in oppressing somebody else. And the kind of look on his face at that point, I think is something that's going to communicate to a lot of an audience that does not necessarily come to stories with the same sort of perspective as a person of color would. So I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, personally.
That episode I go back and forth on because I've seen a lot of discussion among communities of color about that episode in particular with, you know, the history of Rosa Parks. The story that we're told in school is pretty much framed around a single tired black woman who refused to give up her seat, when it's actually part of a much larger story of organization and a whole community working together and strategically picking a point where they can actually make the most impact.
I was so scared when I started watching that episode that they were going to do that, and I was so thankful that they did not.
I actually wish that they had. I really wish that they had, because to me it felt like...
No, I mean, did not, they didn't, like, do injustice to the history.
See, I kind of felt, I don't think that they pushed this, I don't think they pushed the envelope as much as they should have, because there were hints in the story where, you know, Ryan goes back with Rosa to her home and meets Martin Luther King, and there's the intimation that there is a discussion going on that Ryan has stumbled into, and the idea that, it's like this, they're actually, I think they were trying to intimate, and I don't know what happened on what got left on the cutting floor, but it's like they're trying to intimate that there was a discussion that Rosa was part of, and that this was a conscious choice that she was making. And when it got to that big moment, you have the doctor, who is a woman for the first time, but also who is a white woman, still saying, we can't interfere, we have to let this happen. What I wish had happened, and I still think it would have had the same impact in the story, is that there had been some point where Rosa had told or said something to Yasmin, the doctor, about how she knew what she was doing, and that this was a choice that she was making. And even though the doctor knows that she can't interfere, just having Rosa say, don't interfere. This is my choice. This is a choice that my community has planned for. We know that this has to happen. That slight shift in the power dynamic and who is shown to have agency in that story. I wish they had pushed it just a little bit farther to that, because I see what they were doing. It was still a very moving moment, but to me, it still looked as a moment where you had a white woman saying that we're going to let this happen because it has to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of Doctor Who in comparison to other shows like The Expanse and at least the first season of Star Trek Discovery, where it wasn't, they were dealing with, like The Expanse deals with issues of class and politics and economics, and without having the kind of 80s tinge of a very special episode, or an episode special. Whereas I think with Chibnall's, it felt like the Saranga conundrum was, oh yeah, it's just a little cute thing that eats aliens, we need to not kill it. Or at least in the UK is giant spiders are bad. You know, I think you're kind of touching on it. There needs to be a little bit more nuance. Would that be a fair thing to say, or?
Well, I was going to say, I feel like Arachnids in the UK seems to be an episode that is unfairly maligned. and I'm not just saying this because, you know, my favorite doctor is also pooped on quite often, but I really enjoyed that episode. And I felt like it didn't just talk about, you know, the politics and stuff, but, you know, I felt that it had a very strong environmentalist message as well. And I really felt bad for those fighters, even though they terrified me. And that was something that I felt, you know, I didn't get too much of when I see the threats of foreign aliens, you know, completely divorced from what we see day to day. I really like that a part of this season's overall focus of making things more present, things that you see every day, making the scope of the storytelling very intimate as opposed to an overall like galaxy thing. It makes the stakes higher, and it feels like every episode is much more personal. So, you know, I felt really bad for those fighters.
I do have another example that I can cite, which is not written by Chibnall, which was for Glam, which is it's going to be the Amazon, because I felt like the writer was starting with a very strong distrust of like large mega corporations. And I felt at the end what they started to do was, oh no, they're not bad at all.
Right, it just didn't go far enough. It started on one track saying, perhaps we should re-examine the way that we're handling all of our lives with things like Amazon, and then at the end it's like, we're just gonna kind of drop that and pretend everything's fine.
Yeah, and then they went to the kind of trope of the terrorist, where it's like,
The
hey,
homegrown terrorist.
yes.
I thought that was a little ballsy, I guess.
I mean, like, I'll admit, I have very mixed feelings about this season, because I think overall it did a really good job, and I like the fact that the stories were smaller. It just felt like, and I understand this is Chibnall's first season, it felt like he had too heavy a hand in it. It felt like it was more, like the scripts that I really love were the ones that he didn't write.
Right.
Like, I love the one with the talking frog. Because it was just a great, because as someone who, I take care of my mom. She's been chronically ill for a couple of years. And the idea of a man who is so deaf, and I live with a certain amount of grief every day. I mean, my mom's dying. And Mom, if you're watching this, I'm sorry, but I gotta be honest. So I have to deal with a certain amount of grief and mourning. And there's something about the idea of being so not wanting to let go. And at the end, when the doctor's telling the sentient universe in the form of the talking frog, we're friends, you may laugh, but I cried. And that's like, and I think that I would rather have that kind of storytelling versus kind of, I think Chibnall was doing, was channeling some of that early stuff as a fan into his writing. I wish there had been more, because everything about this season I loved was underplayed. The soundtrack was underplayed. It wasn't Murray Gold's, I'm going to tell you how you feel. It wasn't the, the plots were, again, like Cristal said, a lot more intimate. I wish there had been more storytelling like that, where it reminds me of some of the best moments of Who, like the last 10 minutes of Doomsday, or the end of The Green Death, where the doctor cries because his companion says, I'm leaving you and moving on with my life. And I think that, at least for me, what I love about this season is, for the first time, I'm actually surprised, and actually, not only that I was able to enjoy Who, but it's like the first one where I rewatched it right after I saw the episode. Before we shift to questions, any final thoughts?
I wanted to touch upon like what you were saying, like how the writing has changed, and just like the film industry. Because my sister worked in the film industry when I was like a teenager. She still does actually. And what's really weird, like my first job was working on a film set, and like for HBO, when it was like fledgling HBO. And back then, the entire production company, I was the only female there except for the receptionist. And there were like 2 male to female transgender people, but they got the job as males. Okay, so working in a film company where everybody was basically male, started out as male, and now seeing that shift, and also my sister being trans, working behind the camera, I always thought, oh, I'll never see trans people in front of the camera, and to see all that happening now, and Doctor Who changing to a female is really cool, because I remember Stephen Hawking saying that. So that was how he was saying, yeah, the next Doctor should be female. So, yeah, I think it's an exciting time, so I'm really looking forward to it.
Cool. Okay, so please, we've got a microphone. Please feel free to step up and ask some questions. You have it?
Can you please use the mic while you're asking questions? That would be really appreciated. Thank you.
Yes, I happen to be naturally loud, but not everyone has my volume, so.
Yeah, it's also like, this is a practice we're all trying to get into to be more accessible and everything. So please use the mics. This is for everybody's benefit.
I enjoyed Series 11 a great deal too, and I agree with your comments about its strengths and flaws. But when you were comparing it to previous seasons, I think you were, don't you think you were selling the Capaldi years a little short, particularly season 10? Bill?
No.
I hated Bill.
So we already have an issue with the I really need my characters, people in life, people in general to be competent. And Bill was caught to do these things. I would yell at the TV and say, why are you doing this?
I feel like Bill was I think Bill was shortchanged. I was super excited to see a black woman who's a companion, who is also a lesbian, and there were so many things where I think she made a really great companion as somebody who's just like, this is cool, wait, you're gonna do what again? Like when they go out to the Regency episode, I feel like that was sort of a glimpse at what they were trying to do to change and progress the series, where Bill's just like, oh, wow, more black folks here in Regency England than I thought there were going to be. And the Doctor actually says this time, yeah, history is a bit of a whitewash. And I'm like, that was awesome! Just like, more of this, please. But Bill, like that last episode with Bill, when they have her literally become a monster. And everybody's like, all these little white kids are afraid of her in the barn because I'm like, oh, all the symbolism there, somebody should have looked at the scripts just a little bit more, but they were trying. They were really trying. I don't think it's shortchanging it to say that there were things that by the end, I feel like Capaldi was making a script work and a character work that he was better than.
Yeah, I will say that with Series 10, I thought the idea of Bill was a great idea. The problem was, I think at that point, Moffat was exhausted, and there were so many references in the episode in various episodes, like the Eaters of Light, that, oh yeah, I happen to be gay. I mean, Bill is, I think there were moments like in Thin Ice, which was written by Sarah Dollar, where she has that active role, but I don't think it's shortchanging Series 10. I think Series 10, except for that, the two-parter at the end was kind of I think creatively it was, Moffat was running on fumes, and I think I like the idea of a character about Bill, but I think she was very underwritten. So I have to be honest. I think it also, that season I think was very much I'm glad we've got Jodie now, because I kind of felt that the writing it felt like a lot of too many familiar story beats.
Do you have any?
Because we're like over here arguing.
Yeah. I will say, I really greatly enjoyed Bill when she first started, and I don't think that she was any more incompetent than some of our other companions.
Well, I also hate Donna Noble, which I know will get me a lot of hate.
Lots of wrong opinions on this panel, guys.
Martha Jones forever.
Martha's red.
I liked a lot of the women companions. I mean, I think they have progressed over time. So I definitely like Martha. I definitely like Billy. So I don't know. I don't know. I'm still switching modes, thinking, okay, the Doctor is now female, so kind of observing that more at this point. But as a sex researcher, I have to say one thing that I do not like in my sci-fi is love stories. So I always roll my eyes at love stories. So I'm happy when Doctor Who doesn't have love stories in it. Even though that one episode with Billy and where she confronts her old self, you know, that one I actually liked. I forget the name of it. Why am I spacing?
Is it Father's Day? With Billy?
No, the other one where she's on that planet and she has to fight these robots that pop up and she's kind of like a prisoner.
Oh, you mean the girl who waited?
Yeah, that one I liked actually.
Yeah.
But I roll my eyes at every single Star Trek because I'm like, oh, I'm gonna make myself a sandwich now.
Okay, so next question.
You've touched on it a few times, but I wanted to hear a little bit more about what you think about the extent to which and the ways that they dealt with Jodie's gender.
So the question is about expanding on the discussion about how they handled the change in gender of the Doctor.
You know, I felt like maybe the Witchfinders episode was probably the biggest one that I felt that really referenced it, especially when she was being, you know, she had to be like the assistant Witchfinder. She couldn't be in charge like she usually is, and you know, just dealing with that dynamic in that episode, I thought was really. I don't want to say fun, but it was fun. It was good to see it. And I liked that they didn't, you know, sugarcoat it or put it under the guise of some other, of something else. They explicitly said that, you know, nonsense woman. I'll talk to my Nubian prince here, who's clearly in charge. And I also...
Bless Alan coming.
Bless
Seeking's greatest
Wonderful.
Yeah, I feel like this is one of the things where I was really concerned. I wanted there to be a doctor who was a woman way earlier than this, but knowing that it was Moffat writing it back then was kind of like, ooh, seeing how he writes women, there could be all sorts of terrible jokes, and I was terrified at some point this season we were going to get a really bad transphobic joke about the Doctor switching gender. And thankfully that did not happen. I'm really, really happy that that was not a thing, that they weren't making this type of jokes that I think even 5 years ago, someone might have said like, oh, this is not going to be that big of a deal.
I like that there weren't any like boob jokes.
Yes!
I was totally worried about.
That's all women think about is like, oh,
Clearly, I'm constantly thinking about
In the very, very beginning, when she's trying to figure out what her costume is, what she's going to wear, the frustrations of female clothing. Every woman in this room understands what I'm talking about.
I love that in a way the Doctor has her own voyage of discovery. Because like in Demons of Punjab, she's like, oh wait, a girl's night out. I've never done this before. This is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Or the Witchfinders, where a couple of times. And you know, to me the big one was where she says, you know, as a white, you know, this never happened to me as a dude. They just automatically assumed that I was. But I also like the fact that it's like my big thing heading in was I could see them doing one of two things. I mean, I agree on Moffat because he wrote a female doctor for a comedy sketch, and there's a joke involving the female doctor that I can't say out loud because it violates code of conduct. But with Jodie, I was afraid they'd go either like Emma Peel, Buffy action person, or kind of like really glam, high-end person. And I like the fact that Jodie's doctor is fun. She's inquisitive. There's a sense of wonder. And I like the fact that Whittaker herself has said that when she was pulling from the part, she pulled from a lot of 80s kids action movies, which I think helped because it brought a different dimension to the Doctor than just, I'm the Doctor, I know everything. There's an actual kind of real curiosity about it that I really just love about the character.
I also really appreciate that she's not sexualized, which is very rare for a character.
I think that's the thing with the costume too, right? Like it's a fun costume. It has personality.
It has personality
to it. Right? What? Pockets.
It has pockets.
doctor would actually think, the lieutenant's coat always had like the big deep pockets, you know, but it's that it
Jelly babies?
Yeah, jelly babies. And it kind of feels like this was, pockets is a joke that many women will get about why it's a big thing, but the costume itself is not, it does not have to be feminine or masculine. It actually is something that's a little bit more neutral, you can see anybody regardless of gender wearing that costume. And it's nice that, there's nothing wrong with the tough ass-kicking woman, there's nothing wrong with somebody who's super glammy, but when we see them in media, they tend to be very stock characters, right?
I'm a strong and independent woman.
Yes.
I'm not gonna take it.
I have no emotions. I am just here to kick ass. It's like, yeah, I think those characters are cool, but when that's all you see when women are put into these things, and you add all of the extra factors of, what their sexual orientation is, if they're not white, all of those things, and I like that we get to see Jodie be the doctor who gets to be a woman for the first time, but also it's still very much the doctor. There is nothing about who Jodie Whittaker was in this role that was not identifiably the doctor.
Yes.
Yeah, this about her costume, I looked up her inspiration for that. So she found some photo, I guess from 1980s model or something, walking down the street in that. And so it's interesting when an actor contributes to their costumes, because so many times I have these frumpy actors coming in when I work with them in film and theater, and then I have to transform them and make sure they don't have things all lopsided before they go on stage. And kudos to Roger Moore. Kudos to Roger Moore. He designed his own costumes for the Persuaders. So I was impressed with that one. But yeah, so her costume is interesting, because it is unisex in that sense. And I like that she put her input in there. And I'm a big fan of Emma Peel, so I would not mind seeing the next female doctor be in Emma Peel, because I have a motorcycle that I customized to make it look all modish. And I have Emma Peel outfits, and I'm currently designing an Emma Peel coat with pockets. So I am all over the Emma Peel. So a little bit of Emma Peel in the next female doctor, I am all for that.
Okay, we've got time for another question.
Okay. I was wondering what you thought of the doctor's interference with that witch trial after her being adamant that we can't interfere with history in the Rosa episode.
Well, isn't it always it's the doctor's thing? The doctor knows when there's a part of time that you cannot interfere. Pompeii had to happen, Rosa Parks had to happen, or there are things that the doctor knows have to happen either because they're time locked, or because if it doesn't happen, the doctor knows what the consequences are going to be. It's always one of those, I feel timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly. Here are the things that we can interfere with and the things that we can't. But that felt it wasn't the same. I think if they had done something like the Salem witch trials, like a piece of actual history that we had known about, that it would have been a little bit more really, you're going to mess around with that. Please see Legends of Tomorrow, where they just mess up the timeline constantly. Don't care.
Also, I felt in that episode, and in a lot of the episodes with the Doctor, it reminds me a lot of also the Star Trek episodes where they, we can't interfere with the Prime Directive, but they do anyway. And part of what makes it entertaining is seeing them try to fight to see for what they hope for and reconcile that with what should be, and how we can grow from the things that we can't change.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say there's a thing that happens early on in the Amy Pond episodes where she points out that the doctor always says, "Oh, we can't interfere, we can't interfere, we can't interfere. We can't interfere until a child is crying." And the doctor is
that is kind of a thing that across most seasons, the doctor will not stand for a child being terrorized or being
Well, even
upset.
Clara brought that up in Face the Raven when she said the doctor wouldn't go through with getting revenge on Schilder and all the people on the Trapp Street because as soon as his child started crying, he was going to stop.
Yeah, and something to consider about that particular episode is at the time, there were witch trials going on all in England. I mean, it was actually against, there were actually laws in place. And James I was actually, he was Mr. Divine Right of Kings. And he, I had to do a little research of this for a podcast, but I like the fact that they didn't necessarily just do like London history. And I think it's easier to know when it's little village that you make up than it is saying like the Salem witch trials, and you go, oh, okay, Cotton Mather, you must stop.
So timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly.
For reasons of plot.
It's always for reasons of plot. I feel like this season, it's very interesting to go back and look at what decisions they made, because it's actually a really good part of the story of it. Oh no, here are the decisions that they made clearly for plot to happen. It's if you are a storyteller of any kind, it's actually really good to go back and look at these episodes of any show that you like, actually, and pick apart what they are doing, because you can learn from what is working and what isn't.
Okay. Just fiddling with my camera. So, if there's no other questions, why don't we maybe finish with each of us give our kind of final thoughts as to what we'd like to see for next season, because it'll be shown it's currently in production, it'll be shown in 2020, and I actually have two things I'd like to see for next season. One is I'd like to see Yaz as the lead companion. I think the whole Ryan Graham father-son family thing is played out. I don't mind them moving off screen, and I'd like to see her take more of a lead. I'd also like to see more scripts that are not written by Cristal.
I'm sensing a bias.
I mean, I don't know if this is in production in any way, shape, or form, but I would really love to see some East Asians. I'm glad that there are South Asians all over Doctor Who now, which is huge. But I would love to see people who look like me.
I'm going to pop it over to Cristal because we're going to go around this way.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Thanks for putting me on that spot. Well, I mean, I would really like to see, I'd like to see some more episodes in America. I know that, Doctor Who is very, very English. But, speaking to the brand new scope of the Doctor Who audience, I think it really behooves them to put different parts of the Empire, or formerly the Empire, into it and their history. And I think I read somewhere that every 7 days a country celebrates its independence from England. And it's a lot of stories that could be explored there. And I'd love to see that explored.
I'm literally from one of those countries in Asia.
Yeah, I'm greatly looking forward to it with bated breath. What I would like to see, like not in every single episode, but I'm thinking like a little bit of like, that never happened to me when I was male. Because growing up around trans people, and especially male to female trans, and those who have been in the military and things like that, I've heard all sorts of stories like, they make you march in a skirt in cold weather, because, you're female, we need to see your legs, that kind of stuff. And all sorts of other stories, countless ones, and it'd be interesting to see the Doctor talk about that, and maybe even talk about, on this planet that doesn't exist, kind of like what they did on Torchwood, like, we don't have that problem here,
I would definitely love to see more Yaz. I would love to see more writers of color actually doing the scripts, and not having them just be scripts about stories focused on issues of people of color. Just have a more diverse writers group. That's really what I'd love to see. And I would love it because as much as I really, really wish they had taken the step of making the first woman doctor a woman of color, I would love for there to be episodes where the Doctor isn't just looking at how things are different for her now that she's a woman. I would love to see her actually interrogate and call out the fact that she has white female privilege. I would love to see that, because there are going to be points where she's going to be talked down to because she's a woman. But there are definitely stories where I wish that she had called out the fact that she gets to move around more because she is a white woman, and 2 out of her 3 companions are people of color.
Okay.
Oh, one quick thing I wanted to say also. It made me think of, I can tell when the difference between when a male is directing and when a female is directing, because sometimes the males make really stupid choices. So, like, for example, like in Sherlock with the daughter of that serial killer fellow, where she uses a cane to walk around, but she walks around in stilettos. What woman would do that? That is a director's choice. I'm sure the designer did decide on that. And so I like.
How are we going to know she's a woman if she's not very
really do wear heels all the time.
So I think the general theme is more sensible shoes and more pockets. Thanks everyone for coming. Before we go, I'd like to invite everyone to attend our Doctor Who fan meetup on Sunday at 1:30 in room S502A. And I'd also like to turn it over because there's a panel tomorrow that you might be interested in.
Dawn, this is yours.
They're Michigan are on a panel called From Sulu to Rose Tico, which is going to be talking about Asian Americans in geek culture. And we're actually going to get to talk about some fun stuff this time as well, as opposed to just always saying, why are we being played by Scarlett Johansson?
I'm going to complain a little bit about the fact that we're overlapping with the Into the Badlands premiere screening just a little bit.
So that's going to be 11 a.m. tomorrow in the room right next door.
Okay, thanks everyone for coming, and enjoy the rest of the show.